Welcome back to the Noise Podcast. Live from Queens, New York, we are here for week 10 of the show. This season, we are pulling back the curtain on the grind of betting an NFL season with an analytical approach, real-time reactions, and an honest look at the highs and lows. Each episode gives you a seat at the table as the NFL season unfolds. Whether you're betting alongside us or just here for the sweat, welcome back to the Noise.
Analytics don't work. Smart guys wanted to fit in, so they made up a term called analytics.
The analytics don't mean anything in football. Take those numbers and you can make them say whatever you want.
The numbers, basically. What do they mean? The numbers, basically. What do they mean?
All right, guys, there is a ton to get into today. We are right at the midway point of the season, going into week 10. The trade deadline has just passed this week, so I'm recording this on Tuesday night, so you are getting my honest and live reactions to most of today's trades. I'll talk a little bit about some futures implications. I will talk through a couple game picks, and we will have a fun surprise towards the end of the show, so make sure you stay tuned. So talking about the deadline today, right? We had a couple big moves that happened, right? Probably the biggest trade today is Sauce Gardner getting moved to the Colts for 2 first-round picks. In my opinion, a bit of an overpay by the Colts, but addresses a need for them, and honestly, good for the Jets to kind of call it quits on the season and this roster. It just didn't come with an Aaron Glenn firing, but I hope by the end of the season they are, okay with kind of just letting him walk. But great move for the Colts from a player acquisition standpoint, right? If we want to talk about the value of, if they gave up too much for a player like Sauce, perhaps, but really good move for them that solidifies their defense a little bit more. I still think they are an average defense, right? This obviously can give them a bump, especially if we see a little bit more of a rejuvenated Sauce Gardner. But this is really good for their overall coverage unit, right? Better coverage will help the pass rush. Better pass rush helps the coverage. That, those two things are always hand in hand. So hopefully, they are, a little bit more solid on defense because we really haven't seen them be tested too much. So that's the headline. And I think, we'll talk a little bit more about that Indy-Pittsburgh game. I know that was a big topic for me last week on kind of talking about this trap game concept or, what's going on with how books are pricing this stuff. And obviously with Pittsburgh coming through with a pretty big win. We'll get into that in a little bit, but Jets clean house, right? Michael Carter traded Quinnen Williams, so it's about that time for the Jets to kind of hang it up. We saw them coming into the week as about a 1.5 to 2 point favorite hosting the Browns, and now that's been flipped already. Browns are 2.5 point favorites, which I'm not sure I can get there on that number, but just at the state of the Jets roster, right? We're really not looking too good. Other noteworthy team, I think, is the Dallas Cowboys. Does Jerry Jones not know his team isn't good? I mean, I feel like we say this every year with Jerry. He's not capable of running an NFL franchise from a player personnel and coaching perspective. He's out of his depth. I know he wants to be, he basically wants to be the George Steinbrenner of football. You can't do that in the NFL. You can't just buy the top talent and expect it to go well. And he doesn't even buy the top talent for the most part. So, this is not a good trade for them, right? Moving a first round pick and acquiring Logan Wilson. I'm not a big fan of this strategy by Jerry Jones to push at this current moment. I don't understand why he thinks the team is going to be competitive going into the season. And sorry, I think he gave up the first for Quinnen Williams, but he also acquired Logan Wilson from the Bengals. I'm surprised that they looked so poor against Arizona, right? I guess Arizona's offense, is healthier with Jacoby Brissett at this point in time. I'm still not ready to say that Brissett is better than Kyler Murray or he, is should be the starter for the rest of the season. I'm ready to go there, but we can't acknowledge at this point that he's played much better than Kyler, and the drop off from a point spread perspective at this point is very, very minimal. So I'm surprised. I'm surprised that the Cowboys played that bad. The offense, which has been, a top 5 unit at certain points during the season, really couldn't get anything going. Obviously, fumbles don't help, right? You had a Jake Ferguson fumble that was lost. You had a Javonte Williams fumble that was lost. George Pickens fumble that they ended up recovering. So just a lot of bad news for them, and a lot of struggle from the offense. And the defense continues to be one of the worst units in football. Right, so I guess Jerry hasn't gone completely senile on us, where he does understand that his defense is one of the worst in the NFL. But, to give up future assets for this team at this point in the season with their record, I can't say I agree. I mean, I guess, yes, we're going to upgrade their defense, getting Quinnen Williams, which is a big need for them, getting Logan Wilson as a linebacker, which is another need. But they have needs everywhere. The cornerback play is terrible. Obviously the overall defense has rated pretty poorly, but this is not a good team in general. Even though the offense at times can look really, really sharp, I just don't see where they're getting this idea that they're going to be competitive this year. Don't get me wrong, right? In the NFC East, right, they're going to get a bunch of freebie wins, right? Jaden Daniels goes down in week 9 with a bit of a freak injury. Towards the end of the game, they were already out of it. He hasn't been playing too much, so I don't. I'm not saying that they should have put in Mariota at that time, but it just really sucks to see a player of Daniel's caliber, go down in a situation where he really had no need to be in the game. So broken arm, dislocated elbow. I don't expect to see him the rest of the year. Naturally, if Mariota and the Washington Commanders are able to rattle off 10 straight victories or something, sure, maybe you'll see him come back and try to get ready for the playoffs. But I don't see that being the case here. I think maybe similar to this to the Joe Burrow injury earlier, right? If he's healthy enough by the time that before the end of the season, there's just no purpose in bringing him back to get your star quarterback hurt towards the end of the year when it's meaningless. So that sucks. But point being about the Cowboys, maybe Jerry Jones looks across over there and says, well, there's a couple freebie wins for us against them, against the Giants that they could beat up on and be competitive. But the NFC has been quietly much more competitive than expected, right? Carolina, don't look now. The Carolina Panthers are 5-4. This is, one of the worst rated teams that we had coming into the year. And we believed in the upside a little bit of Dave Canales to be able to try to design this offense to be a little bit better. But the real surprise has been the defense. The rushing defense continues to be the best in the league. If you had the Packers in Survivor like I did, you are quite upset at both that game and that outcome, and not only how Carolina was able to win, but also how poorly the Packers and Matt LaFleur responded to Carolina's game plan. And this is an interesting case to be made about the NFL in general, right? Where I know we're kind of getting a little off topic, but just to think about this for a second, right? We rate offenses and we talk about offense from an efficiency standpoint, right? Because efficiency to me, or to most of the analytics community, is what is repeatable, right? We're not judging offenses based on their 99th percentile outcomes where, they throw up a bomb to a star wide receiver and he comes down with a contested catch and, the offense scores 1,000,000 points. We're really not judging teams off of those types of plays. We're judging them off the average of what they're putting out and how efficient they're able to run their offenses. So Carolina in that game was extremely inefficient. They were not good. Their EPA per play was I can pull it up really quick, but they did not run a particularly efficient offense. Yes, it was positive. I'm not saying it was bad, but it was not as high as you would expect to beat a team as a 15 point or a 14, 13 point underdog. That being said, time of possession is extremely critical in the NFL. And when you're playing a team like the Packers who do have a highly efficient offense, right? They are, one of the top teams before this week in EPA per play. And that's something that has helped them kind of continue winning at this point in the season. But Carolina didn't give them the ball. Yes, they ran it sort of inefficiently, and their short pass game was atrocious, right? Bryce Young did not have a good game from an efficiency standpoint on this, but their offense being kind of methodical and prodding ended up being really, really good for their defense, which didn't have to be on the field all that much. And if you've heard me say it before, the best defense is a good offense. And in this case, the best defense is a good enough offense that holds the ball. And you see this with all the top teams like the Chiefs, like the Bills, right? Once they're able to maintain a lead, they are really, really good at efficiently running the ball. Carolina didn't even really do that in this case. They kind of just slowly beat them down and didn't really give Green Bay much of a chance. So I got to the EPA per play numbers really quick here. Bryce Young, 0.1 EPA per play. Total EPA in the game, 2.6. This is lower than Jordan Love's EPA per play at 0.14 and total EPA of 5.4. So this is a really good example for all the stat nerds out there, right? Everybody that is kind of on the other side of believing in analytics. And, I know my podcast intro is kind of a big joke on how people don't understand how football games are actually won. But this is an actual really good example of where you need to combine the quantitative and the qualitative. Jordan Love, by anyone's eye test, looked pretty terrible. His decision-making with the football was not good for the most part. And the mistakes that he makes are back-breaking mistakes. They are game-ruining mistakes. So when you have systems like EPA or CPOE, they don't really capture that all that well. You definitely have turnover-worthy play metrics and stuff like that, there are ways to evaluate, some of these bad throws that he makes, right? But when you're considering, EPA per play is one of the most predictive things in football, one of the most predictive metrics for future success. So when you look at somebody having a positive EPA per play, and especially having a more positive EPA than their opposing quarterback, you would expect that to they would win more often over time. And yes, while the Packers may win this game, if you repeated it 10,000 times, they'll win it a few more times than they did. Right? We got this bad outcome, but looking at Jordan Love, you have to recognize that some of these throws he makes are just abysmal. I mean, the down the field interception in the end zone that was dropped, that was ridiculously bad. Cross body, I don't know what goes through his mind when he releases that ball. And it was similar to that Browns game that they played earlier in the year that I also lost some survivor entries on, where the interception that he did throw in that game, I was like, what? Why would you release the ball there? Like, what are you looking at? What could you possibly looking at? And we treat Jordan Love and the Packers like this elite offense because by EPA per play, by efficiency metrics, they are. But man, they do not pass the eye test. So this is a very interesting crossroads, and honestly, why I don't really find myself backing the Packers all that often, because they're believing in analytics and which is an oxymoron, but using analytics and using some of the metrics that I talk about on this podcast all the time, using that data doesn't tell the whole story, and you need to be able to contextualize it. And it's less about saying that, okay, well, I can watch football and I can tell you that this guy is good or not. It's more about, how do I combine the metrics I'm seeing and what I'm watching on the field, right? How do I put together different metrics, right? How do I weigh these things? And do I weigh them differently for different players, right? When you have turnover-worthy plays that are screamingly bad in high-leverage situations, how do you then quantify that when you're evaluating a quarterback or an offense? I think if the answer to that question was widely available, then the betting markets would be the most efficient markets in the world, and nobody would make any money. But they're not, and I think that is, to me at least, that's the fun part. That's the fun part about what we do. That's why I do this show. That's why I try to get feedback from you guys and put that in. We talk about this in the Discord as much as possible, and kind of talking through stuff like that, because there isn't a right way to capture this sort of in between. And again, Jordan Love and the Packers are a good example, but this is stuff that comes up every week, and you can find small examples of this on almost every team. So tangent aside, I think very interesting game, and obviously very poor outcome for many of us in Survivor, me included, who have burned all my entries left on the Green Bay Packers. So I rest my case there. So moving along down the line a little bit, some other trades I just want to highlight that I think will be impactful for these teams. The Seattle Seahawks picking up Rashid Shaheed. I think that's going to be great. I think that's a great fit. Obviously, he's familiar with Clint Kubiak, having been the offensive coordinator in New Orleans last couple of years. I think he's a good fit, right? JSN is light years better than most of the wide receivers out there right now. So getting him some help, and they have the flexibility, right, of Shaheed being a defense stretcher, but also being someone that can play out of the slot, right? With JSN, plays really well out of the slot. And with Cooper Kupp on the team, I know he didn't play last week, but Cooper Kupp being a traditionally slot player as well, you get so much opportunity to mix and match, right? The motion becomes so much harder to guard because that all of these players are capable of putting up really good performances out of any position on the field. So I really like the variety that I think the Seahawks are going to be able to show with these offensive pieces. I think they're still struggling to get the run game into a place where it is as efficient as possible, but so far so good, and record-wise, and Sam Darnold is obviously playing some of the best football we've ever seen from him. So I'm happy for him. Right, he's quietly jumped up the MVP award rankings. I'm not sure that that's an award that he can feasibly win, but if we live in a world where the Seattle Seahawks are the number one seed in the NFC, I think he's super live for an MVP. So not a bet recommendation, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him get some love in the voting markets towards the end of the year. So that's a nice one. I think what I think is interesting as well is the Jalen Phillips to Philly trade. Philly has been really, really struggling to get a pass rush. I mean, they asked Brandon Graham to come out of retirement to try to play for them. So I'm interested to see, right? Jalen Phillips has been a bit of a question mark. Obviously well-regarded player coming in from the draft, but had the early season injury in his rookie year and has really struggled to both stay on the field and find some consistency. But, the guy that has game-breaking talent. So I'm curious if Philly can use and rotate him, in a way that they have in years past where, this year the guys that they have in there are really just not doing the job. But if we look back at their Super Bowl team or, some of their other competitive teams over the last couple of years, rotating in really good pass rush pieces has been a trademark of the Philly defense. So I'm interested to see how this works out for them. I do think they paid up a little bit, but, I think when you're in win now mode for Philly, you're really not, really not too concerned, with that third rounder. So I like that for them. I like that the Jags picked up Jacoby Myers, even though I'm not a huge fan of what they're doing in Jacksonville. Baltimore picked up a defensive lineman, which they need some help on that front as well. The Ravens pick up a defensive lineman from the Titans, Draymond Jones. They didn't give up much to get him, so that'll help kind of shore up that defensive front that they've been struggling with. They moved on from Jair Alexander, who also went to the Eagles. Hopefully the Eagles can kind of get something out of him because he really has fallen off a cliff in terms of his ability on the field. So a couple nice moves. Again, a little bit of a overpay by some teams like the Colts, but overall I think a pretty interesting outcomes that we got here. So we'll move on. We'll start getting into a couple of these games. Candidly, I don't have a ton of picks this week. There's a lot of volatility in the market right now. We're also reaching points. I called it an inflection point of the season, but reaching a point in the season where the market's getting a little bit more efficient, harder to find pregame edges on the spread and total. That being said, we did have a look in the Berlin game, the Atlanta Falcons at Indianapolis Colts. I mentioned I would talk about this Colts game a little bit. So obviously, great game by the Steelers, right? And we haven't seen this level from the Steelers defense yet this year. So I'm happy to see that this defense that we expected to be good and has been, quite frankly, poor all year, really showed up for the first time. I don't know what Mike Tomlin voodoo, what he did, but he got them juiced up for this game. He got them ready to go. So I'm upgrading the Steelers, that's for sure, on defense. But I am not ready to say that they were a particularly good offense. This is an issue that I've had with them. They've scored points so far this year, right? And Aaron Rodgers does get the ball out quickly, which is a benefit to him. But I still think the offensive line is not that great. I still think their offensive scheme is really not that impressive. It's very basic. And their defense hasn't been good this year. So I don't think this is much of an upgrade for the Steelers, but on the defense, we will give them a couple points. The Colts haven't played a bad game yet, right? Coming into this game at 7-1, they have been the darling of the NFL, the surprise, Shane Steichen, making this whole thing work. Daniel Jones, career renaissance, JT fighting for MVP. I mean, all these storylines and stuff come together, and they truthfully haven't played a bad game yet. So they played a bad game. I am not ready to, even though I was one of those people that were slower to buy this Colts team, now that we're here, I don't think that we should be downgrading them. I would, in other circumstances, right, I would say something like, oh, well, this team is overperforming, and now that we've seen them have a poor performance, I'm ready to move on and say that the baseline is somewhere in between here, or this should be how we expect them going forward. The Colts, that's not the case. I think they're really good. I think their defense got better, obviously, with Sauce, but they're doing just fine with about an average defense. They have an extremely efficient offense, very aggressive, and very well schemed. So they got guys that do their jobs. And yeah, if you have a game where Daniel Jones turns the ball over 6 times, then you're going to lose that game. And, if this doesn't become a habit for the Colts, I really don't see why you have to make such a massive correction on them. And the market, for the most part, agreed. I'm not saying this like the market ran and downgraded the Colts to the extent that we have to make a massive play on them or anything like that. But Daniel Jones naturally turns the ball over. He threw 3 interceptions and he fumbled the ball 3 times, losing it twice. So that obviously will create extremely negative EPA, right? He finishes the game, I think, I'm pulling it up, -11 EPA, total EPA. So the EPA per dropback is probably even worse. But yeah, that's EPA per dropback at -16 for Daniel Jones. So that's not good. And he'll lose his EPA lead on the year. But again, I think I'm not ready to upgrade the Steelers, and here's why. Aaron Rodgers generated an EPA per play of 0.02 in this game. Total EPA 0.7. Biggest concern for me is the depth of target. Him and the Steelers continue to just run everything short. They don't generate a lot of explosive plays, which means they rely on yards after the catch. And, while you can generate that, and they do have, skilled players like Jalen Warren and DK Metcalf, it's hard for me to find an offense sustainable where they're going to continuously score points on better defenses than the Colts and have this offensive success. The defense played, a 90th percentile game, and you give them their credit. They have been due, if you will, for a better game. They've been due to, finally step up, and they did. The offense did just enough to maintain the lead, and they won the game. They beat the Colts. They were a 3-point underdog, and they beat the Colts. I am not ready to jump off of any of my opinions on the Colts. And coming back to this game in Berlin, I laid -5.5 with the Colts on Monday morning, I should say. So this came before the news about Sauce Gardner coming over to the Colts. So right now in market, we're looking at -6 or a cheap -6.5. I can't say I would lay 6.5, but if we end up getting cheaper sixes, I would still play it. But 5.5 -115 is our bet. This was a larger play for us. And again, this is the value of joining the Discord. We sent this out on Monday morning. We really didn't have an expectation that they were going to make a move this big, but I did think the market was going to be on our side. I thought we would get a little bit of value moving towards a key number like 6. And obviously now with the trade and market sentiment, right, we're definitely going to hold 6 and, maybe 6.5 holds as well. I'm not sure. So I would keep an eye on that, and we'll definitely keep an eye on it for you in the Discord. But again, the Discord is the only place where you can get all of my plays in real time. As soon as I bet something, as soon as it goes into my account, I send a message in the Discord alerting everybody. We try to bet stuff that's readily available in market. So once it's bet, you still have a chance to get in and bet it. But again, if you wait till the next day or you wait till the podcast comes out, you might miss out on some of the value that we find in the Discord. So make sure you guys join. Link is in the description if you're watching on YouTube, and if you're listening on Apple Music or Spotify, make sure you check the description there as well. The only other bet I made is directly related to that Indy Steelers outcome, where the Steelers are now going to LA to play the Chargers on Sunday Night Football. This is a cheap 3 or a juice 2.5 in a lot of markets. I play this at -3 +102, which for the Chargers, I understand Joe Alt went down. He will be out for the season with that ankle injury. They've had offensive line issues all year, and it's come up for sure, right? They've had games where you could say, it didn't really matter that much, but they've also had games where, they're throwing the ball just fine. And obviously they're still missing Marion Hampton, Najee Harris, not expected back, but the running attack has been okay. I really like that the Steelers have kind of started to play better against the run, right? That's been a sore for them, and obviously they're going to rush the passer. This might end up being a tough watch because, if you get some really untimely sacks with Justin Herbert, given that their offensive line is banged up and this Steelers pass rush is finally getting home, if you have untimely sacks, this could end up blowing this bet out of the water, which I understand, and I'm willing to take that on because I do think the Chargers should be rated higher than the Steelers. Not that I'm particularly high on the Chargers, but I'm just not high on the Steelers team. I don't think the Steelers are equipped to take advantage of where the holes in the Chargers defense are. I rate the Chargers to be pretty average, and I rate the Steelers offense below average. So, to me, I think a cheap 3 is a little bit too much here, right? On a neutral, I would make the Chargers at least a 2-point favorite. There's not a lot of home field in LA for the Chargers, but I think that this is a price that is a little bit more consistent with a neutral matchup and giving that that extra home field advantage. That kind of finishes it off for me, where I think a bet on Los Angeles is value here. So, right after that Indy game, we're buying Indy. We're fading Pittsburgh. It doesn't usually work out like that, but here we are. In lieu of other picks, I'll probably have some more picks throughout the week. We'll let the markets kind of settle in at some point. We'll also, we'll run the prop. We'll run our prop models towards the end of the week and start to try to take advantage of that. Props have been pretty good this year, and again, if you want to get all of my picks for every market, make sure you jump in the Discord. So, sorry, in lieu of in lieu of some more plays, I'm going to talk about a couple games that I'm avoiding and why. Giants and Bears. This is two bad teams, right? And these are two offenses that are really good at beating up on bad defenses. And I rate the Giants and the Bears both as very poor defenses. Yes, the Giants have a pass rush that can get home, but that secondary is abysmal. They have guys that are not good, that are hurt. And when you have guys that are the starters and they're not good, their backups cannot be much better, if at all. So we already saw this, right, against San Francisco. And San Francisco doesn't really have that explosive play generation, right? Mac Jones is not really somebody that's pushing the ball down the field all too often. Christian McCaffrey, although, he's been great this year, he really hasn't broke anything off from a yards after contact perspective. So they kind of are a little bit of a methodical offense, and they still carved up the Giants. You give the Giants an opportunity to go up against a team that has more explosive plays, like the Bears. Not that the Bears are a more efficient offense than the Niners, but they certainly have more explosive play opportunity. I'm heavily concerned for this defense. And on the other side, right, the Bears defense is terrible. They've been terrible all year. They have similar issues with the cornerback play. They have similar issues with they actually have even less of a pass rush. So they have similar issues against the run. The Giants, although, are the worst defense in the league against the run. So I think the Bears are deserved favorites here. But long story short, this all sounds like an over, right? But the weather is not looking particularly good in Chicago. We're looking at 20 plus mile per hour winds. We're looking at a temperature below 40. Not that that's super important, but very windy, right? So a game that opens up at 48, 49, all the way down to 47 and a half at a lot of spots. I see a lone 47 as well. So where I'm getting at here is the weather can be unpredictable. We can do all we can with a weather report on a Wednesday morning, but it's not going to be the same as Sunday. And what your job is, right, where you're an observant in the marketplace, or what your job is if you're just listening for picks, is wait in the Discord, is look at these weather reports and see how they correspond with the market, right? If we get an update on Thursday that, the weather in Chicago for Sunday is not going to be so windy anymore, you're going to see this market get bet up. So keep an eye out for that, because these are two teams that should create an overfest, even if they are running the ball a lot. This should be a high-scoring game just because of how bad these defenses are. And we're getting a little bit of line movement that is kind of against that thought. So if you want, you can try to pick off some of those larger numbers that haven't really been adjusted down too much, and take the under. Maybe try to create yourself a middle position. But I think there's going to be a stopping point at this 47.5 range. But if we get past that, I'd be curious to take a little bit of the over. And other game that I would talk about is the Ravens. Ravens are 3.5, 4-point favorites at Minnesota. Minnesota, obviously, winning a huge game against the Lions. All right, they were 8.5 to 9.5 point underdogs. Beat them straight up. Lions didn't really have a chance at all. We talked about how Jared Goff is one of the better players in the league against the blitz, right? And again, good reference for our other conversation about Jordan Love. Jared Goff is one of the better EPA per plays against the blitz in the league, but he looked terrible because he's not mobile, right? So when you're constantly blitzing him and you're also using confusing blitz packages like Brian Flores is known for, he couldn't go anywhere. So they couldn't get the run going, which is very surprising for this Lions team, right? Now, I think a lot of this had to do with the fact that they lost almost every offensive lineman at some point in the game. They all kind of rotated back in at a certain point, but they were certainly not playing with their full unit. And I think actually their guard is going to be out for the considerable future. So they had a couple injuries. They had multiple in-game injuries, and that was part of the reason why they couldn't run on a Minnesota run defense that hasn't been great this year. Right? You combine that with really good coverage in Minnesota, plus a really good pass rush, if you can't run the ball, then you're starting to get blitzed more than you can handle, right? You can beat the blitz when you have some sort of semblance of, of balance in your offense, but they couldn't do that. And not that we think Jared Goff is super, super skilled. He has been really good against the blitz, but this is my point. It kind of is more because of the overall offensive success than Jared Goff's individual play. So while we're evaluating the Lions going forward, we have to kind of think about, and maybe this is an in-game thing, where if they really can't get the run going, they're going to start to get sacked a ton because Jared Goff is not mobile, especially against a good coverage unit where the guys are not getting separation as quickly as you would hope. That pass rush is going to start to get home. So this is something that we're going to keep an eye out with the Lions. But long story short, the Vikings go up against the Ravens, who have the complete opposite of that issue, right? Lamar Jackson is extremely mobile, perhaps one of the best runners we've ever seen. So he should be able to avoid the blitz. He should be able to get out of these situations. The Vikings are also, again, soft against the run to an extent. And the Ravens, all they want to do is run, right? They're built to run the ball with Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry should be able to have a good game against this Vikings defense. And in the position where, when they are passing, when they do drop back, Lamar should be able to use his athleticism and avoid this pass rush. And in that case, right, you're going to beat up on the Vikings defense, despite them being one of the better units thus far. Where my concern lies is, will Lamar run, right? You're coming off the hamstring injury. He didn't look great last week. It was Thursday Night Football, right? But he did have that extended time off. But Thursday Night Football gets a little bit weird sometimes. Guys are guys are less prepared than expected. This happens. But I was a little bit concerned with how he looked individually. Then again, they didn't really need him to do much because it really wasn't a super competitive game through and through. So I'd really like to use this game as an opportunity to evaluate Lamar's overall health. Because in order for them to win, and especially to cover a 4-point spread, they're going to need him to play well, and they're going to need him to run the ball. So if he has an unwillingness to do so or inability to do so due to lingering injury or scheme, I think you're going to be very concerned with the Ravens, and the Vikings would be live to win that game. So long story short, all right, I'm not betting it because in a world that the Ravens play up to their peak potential on how this offense should run, I think they cover this 4-point spread easily, and I would rate them higher. But because we have all these question marks around Lamar and his health, I'm not going to go down that road. We talked about this a little bit last week, but your greatest advantage as a bettor against the sportsbooks is the ability not to bet. Sportsbooks must price this game. They have to post it. So if they are not sure what's going to happen, they're going to do the best they can. If you are not sure what's going to happen, you don't have to bet. All right, and I'm going to close this podcast out with my aforementioned surprise. We are throwing a live watch-along on Thursday, November 13th. This will be during the Thursday Night Football matchup between the Patriots and the Jets. So if you are in the New York City area, please come out, show support, and come enjoy at Connect Astoria. Like I said, we're hosting live watch-along at Connect Astoria Thursday, November 13th. I'm going to be doing a raffle with a giveaway where you will have the chance to win either a Garrett Wilson or Drake May jersey, your choice, whatever team you want to support. We'll be live betting the game, and I'll have a community parlay for everybody to root for together. I have a couple other fun surprises that are planned for you guys, so I'm going to keep that under wraps a little bit, but really looking forward to this event. It's going to be, again, on November 13th at Connect Astoria. I'll put the address in further detail, both in the description on YouTube and in the description on Apple Music and Spotify. You'll also find more information on my Instagram at thenoise.media. Make sure you guys are following. Really hope you guys can come out and support. We're looking forward to having a really good time on Thursday Night Football. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Noise Podcast. I'm your host, Max Gilson. Good luck Hope to see you soon, and have a good weekend. Godspeed.